Welcome to the Clarington Chronicle podcast. I'm your host, Mark Stanish. This is podcast episode number 90-90 for Wednesday, June 6th, 2018. Glad to have you join me. Okay, first off, just a little housekeeping. This is, I'm calling this episode 90-90 because we got kind of out of order. I missed one of the podcast numbering systems, so I have a 90-87, and then now I got 90-90, and next one will be just straight up 91. So just so you know why I'm doing that. All right, well, this is the episode where I'm going to discuss the provincial election, 2018 provincial election, that we all should be aware of and prepare to vote on tomorrow. So it's been a hotly contested election. I think nobody really knows what's going to happen tomorrow, and I think that's very exciting. I think we had a great campaign. I just wanted to share some of my thoughts about the campaign and the debate and the issues and the local candidates, some of the literature, and who I intend to cast my ballot for tomorrow. So election day is June 7, and which is tomorrow at the time that I'm recording the podcast. And, you know, as I was preparing for this podcast, I was kind of thinking about the campaign. I was on my way home today, motorcycling home, and as I entered Durham region, or, you know, you could see the signs everywhere and all the different ridings all the way from Pickering on in, and you saw signs everywhere. Toronto, the same situation in Scarborough. But when I got into Clarington, of course, I was in my home territory, and so I knew the signs and who represented each of the parties and that sort of thing. So it was very interesting. So I saw an older gentleman jump out of his truck. He had parked there at Roswell and Bloor and by the little plaza that they built. And he jumped out and he was fixing up the Liberal signs. So I rode by, and he was in a great mood. He was waving at people, and the odd car was honking and that kind of stuff, right? So he seemed incredibly positive. So that, for me, that's going to be one of the enduring images of this campaign. Is that gentleman who was fixing up the signs. Now, that's not to say the other parties weren't having their signs up as well. I looked around and there were dozens of signs by each of the major parties everywhere. I do not believe I saw a green sign, and I have seen some Libertarian ones here or there, some generic Libertarian ones. But let me just backtrack a little bit. So that's one of the enduring images. Another one is the debate, when there were two candidates sitting there and a lot of empty space to either side of them. I think that was one of my enduring images. And also all the different signs that I saw around the municipality. The rules, now I've run a couple times for election locally, but the rules are pretty stringent for us. You had to put signs every 500 meters, and although several candidates just blew that out of the water and didn't seem to care, there were stringent rules, but all that seems to be going out of the window. So that's one of the main images that I have, though, is that the rules seem to be quite lax when it comes to provincial elections, and quite frankly, I don't actually too much mind that, because it is election day. My son will be voting for the first time this election, so he's been a little bit engaged, which I'm happy to see. But overall, I think those. We also I remember waiting and waiting and waiting to get my voter registration cards, and they finally came, I think, a week or two ago, and it just seemed like a long time that we waited, and a notable time. My son never did get his, so I'm just telling him, having been a polling officer before, I just told him, bring all the ID you have, bring your passport, bring anything that says you live here, anything you can grab, your health card, your driver's license, whatever he's got. So it's very exciting because he's finally, participating a little bit in the election process. Okay, so back to the campaign. I'm very happy with how all the campaigns went, and even on the macro level, if we look at the entire province, I don't think we got into the name calling very much. These things are heated. There's always the odd candidate for the odd party that seems to, have something dredged up on them, or says something silly, or is caught awkwardly, or whatever. And I think we had a minimal amount of that. So I don't know how much of any of that stuck, but I'm just glad that the election was sort of a clean sort of election. People did seem to be focusing on the issues. How it's going to go, who knows, right? Like, it could either swing towards the Conservatives or it could swing towards the NDP. We really have an election that can go either way. Right now, the polls are pretty much even. I think the Tories have a slight edge overall. But again, it's going to be up to the people to decide. So we're going to find out what happens tomorrow evening. Now, with the debate, clearly my last podcast was about the debate. I had attended the debate here in Curtis, and only the Liberal and NDP candidates, Joel Usher and Granville Anderson for Liberals, had participated. I felt that Granville had won that debate. Joel carried himself very well, but I think Granville, by stressing his local roots, really prevailed. The other candidates, I have to fault them for that because, except perhaps, I think the Libertarian candidate had not been chosen yet at that point. But even then, I'd have to fault them for that because they have to know that as soon as the writ's dropped, as soon as we have an election on, you kind of got to have your ducks in a row, right? Like, you've only got at that point a month, or a month and a half out from a fixed election date. If you don't have your candidate ready to go, I think you're not really taking the electorate seriously. Right? Like, you kind of have to, by election day, have at least a platform, have a candidate, by the time the writs drop, have a candidate, have all that sort of in place and a platform, and be ready to participate in debates, etc., etc. I do tend to take the debates very seriously. I've participated in several myself. And aside from that, I just feel that, if you're taking your positions seriously and you believe your positions, you should be able and willing to debate them and be confronted with the questions we all have. Because, I still have many questions. I had the opportunity to ask a question, but I still have many questions that I would like answered from all the candidates. So, and I realize that not everybody has that opportunity, but, just seeing your candidate in action, like, for example, Let's take Lindsey Park, for example. I have not met her. I don't know her. I have no idea how she comes across. If, for example, she needs to take on Doug Ford, I know there's a lot of conservative, support in Durham, but let's say, for example, she needs to take on Doug Ford. Let's say he decides to take some action that, cancel the GO train, for example. How would she stand up to him? I want to assess her ability to stand up to him. Eye to eye, not on paper. We all have credentials and we all can fill out a good resume, for example. But does she have what it takes if I look her in the eye and say, will you represent me and be able to take on Doug Ford? And similarly, with Joel Usher, I had a chance to look him in the eye and say, if he needs to stand up or even take over from Andrea Horvath, does he have that in him? So I like looking at the candidate. I like assessing the candidate and how they function. Everybody has the opportunity to grow, and everybody can function exceptionally or poorly under certain circumstances. But generally speaking, I want to assess the candidates, and I didn't get the opportunity for neither the Greens nor the Libertarian nor the Conservative candidate. So that's a major blow in my mind as to your electability. Now, in terms of the issues. For me, there wasn't a really overarching issue this election. There's debt, there's the provincial debt and deficit, which of course everybody is concerned with, but I think some take it a little bit more seriously, and some see that as perhaps the times were good, so it was the time to borrow, and then other parties may feel that. We can make this up in the future, and some other parties feel that this is just going to break the backs of our children, right? So, but for me, the debt and deficit are huge issues. If whichever party is empowered, wants to ignore it. My understanding is the Conservatives are the party that has the highest deficit, but eventually plans on getting back to balance and has a plan. Well, does not have a plan. It's also they say that they don't have a costed plan. And that seems to be the understanding most people have. All of this is debatable, of course, by the various parties, but that seems to be the consensus. The NDP seems to be putting us more into a position of baked in baked in services. So if we do have dental care and pharmacare and that kind of stuff come in, you're just baking it into the government and making sure that the government maintains its size. I'm not a big proponent of big government, just simply because if you do want to change something or if you do want to cut back, it becomes incredibly difficult. So I think it's better off for as much as possible to be in the private sector, not as much as possible to be in the public sector, the government, but as little as possible, only because it creates more opportunity, more competition, and I do believe that competition leads to better outcomes in general. People, they don't put their mind, if we get into a group situation, they may not put their mind to it as much as they would if they're in direct head-to-head competition. So I just believe in that. So that's sort of a philosophical issue for me. So that to me sort of indicates where I stand. So I do believe that, and that kind of influences my decision making a little bit. Now, just in terms of the credentials for the local candidates, now I think they all seem to be the ones that I saw and the ones that seem to be on paper seem to be reasonably credible candidates. I know nothing about the Green and the Libertarian parties candidates. I couldn't find anything online. It's when I do, Granville Anderson has deep roots in the Curtis and Clarington communities, in various capacities as a Catholic school board trustee, as all sorts of different, he would appear everywhere. So you can't when during my debate, for example, on a local level, he was in the crowd. So that indicates to me his commitment to the community, and he is a lawyer as well. Joel was very impressive at the debate. He did stand his ground, and he did carefully put forward his platform. He did have a solid grasp, I felt, of the issues and possible solutions to them. So that was very impressive. I just do not subscribe to a sort of socialist philosophy. So and he just came across to me as being a little bit too far left. So I could not in good conscience go along with the massive increase in government that I think he was proposing. He's definitely a true believer. He definitely presented his case forcefully. So would he be able to stand up to Andrea? I think he has it in him. So I think he would be able to represent Clarington effectively as an NDP candidate, which he did, and as an NDP MPP. So although I tend to disagree, I think on some of the issues that he has and the approach that he has to solving those issues, I do think that he represents his ideology quite well, and I do believe that he does believe what he's saying. Now, as for Lindsey Park, again, I haven't met her. I don't know who she is really. There have been emailings around. There have been I looked at my stack of campaign literature. I have from the NDP. I have from the Liberals. I have nothing from the Conservatives. I believe I've seen ads of theirs in the paper from all the major parties. But again, it's other than sporadic literature. There was nothing at the debate. I just don't know what she brings, and again, I haven't assessed her. So I think she's a lawyer. I believe she's a lawyer, and a fairly successful one, I understand. So I assume she has some sort of ability behind her. She did win the party nomination of a major party, but again, I haven't had the opportunity to assess her. So really, I can't speak too much about that. In terms of the literature, as I said, I did get something from the Liberals. I got lots from the Liberals. I got mailings from the Liberals. I've seen ads, and they were at the debate. They were handing out literature. So there's lots of material from them. Clearly, they're well funded. Clearly, they have the ability to get their message out there. Similarly for the NDP, I had lots of literature, lots of campaign material to sift through. I've seen ads. Like I'm definitely aware of their positions. But for the Conservatives, I've seen just mostly. I think they're going on the Doug Ford train, and it seemed. And I'm not sure who she supported for the leadership of her party, but I do know that she did put the debate off, and that was for me really off-putting. And I still don't have a piece of literature from her, so I just don't know how to assess that. So in the end, summarizing all this, I think it's pretty obvious that I intend to cast my ballot for Granville Anderson and the Liberals. And that's based basically on his strong community support, support of the community and for the community. Plus, he did bring the GO train here, and there is some debate, well, it would have happened anyways and this kind of thing. And I don't believe that, I don't believe, and even if that's true, the bottom line is he gets the credit. He was there when it happened. And so that's just the way it's going to go. If you were there when it happened, you get the credit too. But, unfortunately, nobody else was. He was. So fortunately for him, he gets the credit. Also, there's the talk of the hospital. I'm fairly physically fit. I feel fine. So, I'm not, hospital issues are not top of mind for me, but they are for many people. So the fact that he's putting a lot of political capital behind the hospital and seems to have accomplished something there, that's good too. New build at Darlington, like all three issues. Those were the three big issues, when we had this 4 years ago. Those were the four big issues that he was campaigning on, and all were achieved. So, Granville, you have to evaluate based on what he's done. So he seems to have accomplished his goals. The other candidates plus Granville, we have to evaluate based on what they're promising. Now, in my mind, promises are a dime a dozen. All of the parties will promise whatever they want. So I think they're all probably on equal ground at that point. So you might say, oh, well, the Conservatives have this promise. It's great. Oh, the NDP have this promise. It's great. Oh, the Liberals have this promise. It's great. In the end, I take them for, as just, for the napkins that they're written on. They're just promises. We've all seen where governments, in the end, will do what they want. They will either betray us, or they may do what we want, or they may not do almost, everything that we want, or that kind of thing. So, promises, in my mind, are just that. So, I don't know how far we can evaluate that. If you're going to vote simply based on promises, you probably will be disappointed in the end. So I noticed the NDP seem to be making the biggest promise here is the dental care. That to me, in my mind, was the biggest issue of the campaign, something that will change the landscape of Ontario for quite some time. Is it enough to sway my vote? I don't know, because obviously not. I don't think that I would prefer more of a competitive system than something that is simply provided for all like that. And it sounds great. Let's just provide everything for everybody. But the problem is, I'm not convinced that the government is the best way to go, or one system is the best way to go. So, it may cover the most people, but we may end up with incredibly long lines. That was another thing. The Liberals, the NDP was saying that they're going to, end this hallway, the healthcare or something. But again, the healthcare wasn't high on my personal agenda, but anybody who says that, I don't know, that sounds to me like a lot of money, and, I don't know. I've been to the hospital. I don't see people lying in the hallways. So I don't know. It's that to me just didn't ring as true. I think the dental one is actually a bigger thing because it's actually achievable, but it comes with a big price tag. Plus, the Ontario government, the province of Ontario is not in a good fiscal situation. So, the Conservatives, my understanding is, actually have the biggest deficit going into it. So I don't know if they want to cut taxes and all that. It's going to be a rough time for anybody who legit tackles this. And I don't think that most voters in Ontario are ready for the fiscal pain that is necessary to actually tackle the deficit. So on balance, I think I'm going to be casting my ballot for Granville Anderson and the Liberals, mainly based on the fact that I think he could stand up to the Premier. I think that he could get things done for Clarington. I think that he's done what he said he would do and should be rewarded for that. Question of the podcast. Who do you think will win the 2018 provincial election in Durham, and why? Who do you think will win the 2018 provincial election in Durham, and why? And that's it for episode 90-90 of the Clarington Chronicle podcast. If you'd like to comment on the podcast or have an idea for an upcoming episode, just email me at claringtonchronicle@gmail.com. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at ClaringtonCron, or on one of the Facebook pages dedicated to Clarington or communities within Clarington, or also on my website, markstanish.com. You can subscribe for free on iTunes or Android and get instant updates when a new podcast is uploaded. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to vote.